You wake up tired, you go to bed tired, you spend your weekend tired, and somewhere in the back of your mind, there's this nagging question: why am I so exhausted when I'm not even doing anything meaningful? You've tried everything: more sleep, better diet, meditation, apps, productivity, hacks, and still, that bone-deep fatigue clings to you like a shadow you can't shake. You tell yourself it's burnout, or stress, or maybe you're just getting older. But what if I told you that the exhaustion you feel has nothing to do with how much you're working or how little you're sleeping? What if the tiredness that haunts you is actually your soul's way of screaming that you've been living a life that was never yours to begin with? Most people never figure this out. They spend decades battling exhaustion with energy drinks and vacation days, never realizing they're fighting the wrong war. But you're here because something in you suspects the truth. This isn't physical tiredness. This is existential collapse. And according to Martin Heidegger, one of the most profound philosophers of the 20th century, this exhaustion is actually a gift, a brutal, unrelenting wake-up call that you've been sleepwalking through an inauthentic existence. This isn't about being tired. This is about being tired of pretending. Let me take you somewhere most people never go. Let me show you what your exhaustion is really trying to tell you. For most of your life, you operated under a simple assumption: do what you're supposed to do, and you'll be fine. Get the degree, get the job, get the relationship, get the house, get the life everyone agrees is good. And for a while, maybe it worked. Maybe you had energy. Maybe you felt like you were going somewhere, but then something shifted. The things that used to excite you started feeling hollow. The goals that used to drive you started feeling arbitrary. The life you built started feeling like a costume you can't take off. And now, every single day feels like you're dragging yourself through concrete. You blame yourself. You think you're weak, or lazy, or broken. You compare yourself to people who seem to have endless energy for their careers, their hobbies, their relationships, and you wonder what's wrong with you. Why can't you just push through? Why can't you just be grateful for what you have? Why does everything feel so heavy? Here's what nobody tells you: that exhaustion isn't a flaw, it's intelligence. Your body, your psyche, your very being is rejecting a life that doesn't belong to you. You're not tired because you're weak. You're tired because you've been spending every ounce of energy maintaining a performance, playing a role, living according to a script written by people who don't even know you exist. Heidegger called this das Man, the they self, the version of you constructed entirely by social expectations, cultural norms, and inherited obligations. And the exhaustion you feel, that's what happens when your authentic self finally stops cooperating with the charade. But what if I told you that this crushing fatigue, this relentless tiredness that no amount of rest can cure, is actually the beginning of the most important transformation of your life? Let's talk about what you've been running on all these years. Heidegger understood something most people never grasp. We don't start life as individuals, we start as copies. From the moment you're born, you're thrown into a world that's already interpreted, already structured, already decided. You inherit a language you didn't create, values you didn't choose, goals you didn't set. You learn what's good and what's bad, what's success and what's failure, what's normal and what's weird, and you absorb it all without question because you're a child and you don't know any better. By the time you're an adult, you've internalized an entire operating system of beliefs, expectations, and behaviors that have nothing to do with who you actually are. You pursue careers because that's what people with your degree do. You maintain relationships because that's what good people do. You buy things because that's what successful people do. You fill your schedule because that's what productive people do. And beneath it all, there's this constant invisible pressure to conform, to fit in, to be acceptable, to be normal. Heidegger called this everydayness the numbing routine of doing what one does, thinking what one thinks, wanting what one wants. And here's the thing, this system works. For a while, it gives you direction, structure, meaning. It tells you where to go and how to get there. It provides the comfort of certainty, the safety of belonging. You look around and see everyone else playing the same game, and that makes it feel real, feel right. You're exhausted? Yes, but you tell yourself that's just part of adulting, part of responsibility, part of life. But there's a cost so profound that most people never see it until it's too late. Every moment you spend living according to external expectations is a moment you're not living according to your own truth. Every decision made to please them is a decision that erodes your connection to yourself. Every time you silence your inner knowing because it doesn't match what's supposed to be, you betray something fundamental, and your body keeps score, your psyche keeps score, your soul keeps score, and eventually, the bill comes due. Nietzsche saw this too, in a different way. He talked about the last man, the person who has optimized for comfort and safety so completely that they've lost the capacity for greatness, for risk, for authentic living. They've become small, predictable, comfortable, and they call it happiness. But Heidegger goes deeper. He's not just talking about mediocrity, he's talking about self-alienation so complete that you don't even realize you're a stranger to yourself. This is what happened to you. Somewhere along the way, you stopped asking what do I actually want and started asking what should I want. You stopped feeling your own feelings and started performing the feelings you thought you were supposed to have. You stopped listening to your intuition and started deferring to experts, authorities, consensus. You became a spectator in your own life, watching yourself go through the motions, feeling more and more disconnected, more and more exhausted, more and more dead inside. And the exhaustion. That's not weakness. That's your authentic self, staging a rebellion. That's your being refusing to continue the performance. That's your soul saying, I will not give you energy for this anymore. If you're resonating with this, if this is landing differently than the usual self-help noise, maybe it's time to stay for what comes next. We go this deep every single week. You know where the subscribe button is? Let me give you an analogy that might help you see what's happening. Imagine you're an actor in a play. When you first got the role, it was exciting. You studied the script, learned the lines, practiced the gestures. You were good at it. People applauded. You got validation, recognition, maybe even some awards. And for a long time, you believed this was your purpose, to perform this role as perfectly as possible. But here's what happens over time. The character you're playing starts to feel more real than you do. You spend so much time in costume speaking someone else's words, expressing someone else's emotions, that you forget what your own voice sounds like. You forget what you actually feel when you're not performing. The boundaries between you and the role start to dissolve, and you're no longer sure where the character ends and you begin. At first, this feels like mastery. You've become the role so completely that it's effortless, natural, automatic. People look at you and see exactly what they expect to see. You've achieved what everyone told you to achieve, you fit in perfectly. But then something starts to happen. The performance that used to energize you starts to drain you. The lines that used to flow naturally start to feel scripted, hollow, fake. The applause that used to fulfill you starts to feel empty, meaningless, insufficient. You find yourself going through the motions, hitting your marks, delivering your lines, but inside, you feel nothing. Or worse, you feel like you're dying. You're exhausted all the time now, but it's not physical exhaustion. It's the exhaustion of pretending. It's the exhaustion of maintaining a performance that requires you to abandon yourself completely. Every interaction requires you to put on the mask. Every conversation requires you to say what's expected. Every decision requires you to consider what the character would do, not what you would do. And you've been doing this for so long that you don't even remember there's a difference. This is where most people stay forever. They sense something is wrong, but they can't quite identify what. They feel exhausted, but they blame their job, their schedule, their responsibilities. They feel empty, but they try to fill the void with more achievement, more consumption, more distraction. They feel disconnected, but they blame their personality, their psychology, their chemistry. They never realize the fundamental problem. They're not living their own life. They're performing someone else's script. And their being is exhausted from the charade. But here's where it gets interesting. Here's where the exhaustion becomes something else entirely. One day, maybe during a quiet moment, maybe during a crisis, maybe for no reason at all, something in you just stops cooperating. You're in the middle of your usual routine, doing what you always do, and suddenly you just can't. The mask feels too heavy, the script feels too foreign, the performance feels too unbearable. And, for the first time in years, maybe decades, you have this thought, I don't want to do this anymore. That's the moment. That's the crack. That's your authentic self finally breaking through the layers of conditioning, expectation, and performance. And it's terrifying. Because if you're not the role, if you're not the script, if you're not the person everyone expects you to be, then who are you? Most people, when they reach this point, panic. They double down on the performance. They try harder to be who they're supposed to be. They push through the exhaustion, ignore the emptiness, suppress the questions. They tell themselves they're just going through a phase, that they need to be more grateful, more disciplined, more positive. They medicate the discomfort with work, with substances, with endless distraction. They do anything to avoid the terrifying question underneath it all. What if I've been living the wrong life? This is what Heidegger calls falling, the tendency to flee from your own authenticity, back into the comfort of conformity, back into the safety of they-self, back into the numbing routine of everydayness. And it makes sense why people do this. Because facing your own inauthenticity means facing the fact that you've wasted years, maybe decades, building a life that was never yours. It means confronting the possibility that everything you've achieved, everything you've worked for, everything you've become might be fundamentally empty. It means admitting that you don't actually know who you are beneath all the roles and performances. That's a terrifying prospect. So most people run back to the exhaustion. At least it's familiar. This is what happened to you. This is why you're so tired. You've reached the point where your authentic self is strong enough to resist the performance, but you're still not ready to let go of the script. You're caught between two worlds, the false self that everyone knows and the true self that you've abandoned. And that tension, that internal civil war, that constant battle between who you really are and who you pretend to be, that's what's destroying you. The exhaustion isn't asking you to rest, it's asking you to stop. Now, I must warn you about something important. When you hear this, when you start to see the architecture of your own inauthenticity, there's a temptation to think the solution is dramatic. You might think, I need to quit my job, end my relationship, move to another country, start completely over. You might think you need to blow up your entire life to find authenticity. And while that might be necessary for some people, it's usually not where the real transformation happens. Because here's what most people miss. Inauthenticity isn't about what you do, it's about why you do it. You can quit your corporate job and start a business and still be living inauthentically if you're doing it because entrepreneurs are supposed to be happier, freer, more fulfilled. You can end your relationship and find someone new and still be inauthentic if you're just trading one set of expectations for another. You can move across the world and still bring your false self with you because you never learned how to leave it behind. The transformation Heidegger is pointing to isn't about changing your circumstances. It's about changing your relationship to existence itself. It's about learning to live from the inside out instead of the outside in. It's about making decisions based on your own authentic understanding of who you are and what matters. Not based on what one does or what makes sense or what people will think. And that's harder than it sounds. Because you've spent your entire life learning to ignore your own inner voice, to distrust your own knowing, to defer to external authority. You've been trained to look outside yourself for validation, for direction, for meaning. You've learned that fitting in is more important than being real, that being accepted is more important than being yourself, that being comfortable is more important than being alive. Unlearning that conditioning, that's the real work. And it's exhausting in a completely different way. Let me tell you about someone I knew years ago. Let's call him David. David was a lawyer, a good one. He went to a top school, joined a prestigious firm, made partner young. From the outside, he had everything: success, money, respect, security. But David was exhausted, chronically, devastatingly exhausted. He slept well, ate well, exercised regularly, but he woke up every morning feeling like he'd been drained of life force overnight. For years, he thought it was the hours, the stress, the pressure. He tried switching firms, taking on fewer cases, delegating more. Nothing helped. The exhaustion persisted, deepened, became existential. He started having thoughts he'd never had before. Is this it? Is this really my life? But he pushed those thoughts away because they were dangerous, impractical, ungrateful. He had a good life, he should be happy. What was wrong with him? Then something happened that changed everything. His father died, and in the strange, disorienting space of grief, David found himself at his father's desk, going through old papers. He found a folder full of his childhood drawings, dozens of sketches, paintings, little creative projects he'd completely forgotten about. And he remembered, suddenly and vividly, that he had wanted to be an artist, not as a hobby, as a life. But somewhere around age 12, He'd absorbed the message that art wasn't practical, wasn't realistic, wasn't what smart people did with their lives. So he buried that desire, learned to want what he was supposed to want, became who he was supposed to become. Sitting there at his father's desk, looking at those childhood drawings, David realized something that shattered him. He had spent 30 years living his father's dream, not his own. He had become a lawyer because his father valued security, because his father respected law, because his father believed success meant prestige and stability. And David had internalized that so completely that he genuinely believed it was his own choice, his own desire, his own path. The exhaustion wasn't from working too hard. It was from working at the wrong thing. It was from spending 3 decades building a life that had nothing to do with who he actually was. Now, here's the important part. David didn't quit law the next day. He didn't have some dramatic breakdown or radical life change. What changed was more subtle and more profound. He started asking himself a different question. Instead of what should I do, he started asking what is true for me. Instead of making decisions based on what made sense or what people expected, he started making decisions based on what felt authentic, what felt alive, what felt real. Some of those decisions were small. He stopped going to networking events he hated. He started saying no to cases that drained him. He began drawing again, not to become an artist, but because it connected him to something real in himself. Some decisions were bigger. Eventually, he did leave the firm, but not because he was running away, because he was moving toward something that actually mattered to him. But the most important change wasn't external, it was internal. David stopped performing. He stopped pretending to care about things he didn't care about. He stopped laughing at jokes that weren't funny. He stopped having opinions he didn't actually have. He stopped being who he thought he should be and started being who he actually was. And yes, it was uncomfortable. Yes, it was disorienting. Yes, he lost some relationships, some opportunities, some security, but the exhaustion that started to lift. Not all at once, not completely, but gradually, over time, David found that he had energy again, not the manic-driven energy of achievement, but something deeper, the energy of alignment. The energy of living from the inside out, the energy of finally being himself. This is what Heidegger means by authenticity. It's not about finding your true self, as if there's some fixed identity waiting to be discovered. It's about learning to live in a way that's yours, owned by you, chosen by you, created by you, rated by you other than inherited, imposed, or performed. It's about taking responsibility for your own existence instead of outsourcing it to what people do or how things are done, or what makes sense. And if this is landing for you, if you're feeling something shift, consider staying for the rest of this journey. This is the kind of depth we explore every week. Subscribe if you want to keep going. Here's what you need to understand about the transformation you're going through. It feels like death because something is dying. The false self, the performed self, the self constructed entirely by external expectations, that self is collapsing. And good, let it collapse, let it disintegrate, let it die, because it was never you anyway. It was always a costume, a mask, a role you took on because you didn't know you had any other choice. But here's the part that nobody tells you, the part that makes this process so disorienting. When the false self starts to die, it doesn't feel like liberation, it feels like annihilation. Because you've identified with that self for so long, because you've lived as that self for so many years. Because everyone knows you as that self, when it starts to collapse, it feels like you're disappearing entirely. You look in the mirror and don't recognize yourself. You make decisions and can't predict your own behavior. You're in conversations and realize you don't know what you actually think anymore. Everything that used to be solid becomes fluid. Everything that used to be certain becomes questionable. This is what Heidegger calls anxiety, not anxiety about something specific, but a fundamental groundlessness, a confrontation with the fact that there is no script, no rulebook, no authority that can tell you how to live your life. You are radically free, and that freedom is terrifying because it means you're responsible. You can't blame your parents anymore. You can't blame society anymore. You can't blame your circumstances anymore. You have to own your choices, own your path, own your existence, and most people can't handle that level of responsibility, so they retreat back into inauthenticity, back into the comfort of being told what to do, back into the safety of conformity. They choose exhaustion over freedom because at least exhaustion is familiar, but you're different. You're still here, still reading, still exploring. Which means some part of you knows there's no going back. The mask has cracked. The performance has failed. The script has ended. And now you're standing in the ruins of your false life, wondering what comes next. Here's what comes next: nothing and everything. Let me explain. The temptation right now is to look for a new script, a new role, a new identity to replace the old one. You want someone to tell you who you really are, what you should really do, how you should really live. You want a new guru, a new framework, a new system that will give you the same certainty you had before, but this time authentic. But that's just another form of inauthenticity. That's just trading one external authority for another. True authenticity doesn't come from finding the right way to live. It comes from accepting that there is no right way. There's only your way, which you have to create moment by moment, decision by decision, without any guarantee that you're getting it right. This is why Heidegger talks about being toward death, the recognition that your life is finite, unrepeatable, and ultimately your own responsibility. Nobody else can live it for you. Nobody else can die for you. And when you truly grasp that, when you feel the weight of that responsibility, something shifts. The question is no longer, what should I do, but what do I choose? And that's a completely different question with completely different answers. So, what do you actually do with this? How do you move from exhaustion and inauthenticity toward something real first? Stop trying to fix the exhaustion. Stop treating it as a problem to be solved. The exhaustion is information. It's telling you something crucial about how you've been living. Listen to it, honor it, ask it what it wants you to know. The answer is usually something like, you need to stop performing, you need to stop pretending, you need to stop living for everyone else. Second, start noticing the moments when you betray yourself. Those moments when you say yes but mean no, when you laugh but aren't amused, when you agree but don't actually agree, when you perform enthusiasm you don't feel, when you pretend to care about things you don't care about. Don't judge these moments, just notice them. Become aware of how often you're living from the outside in instead of the inside out. Third, practice tiny acts of authenticity. You don't have to blow up your life. You just have to start telling the truth in small ways. Actually, I don't want to go to that event. Actually, I disagree with that. Actually, I'm not interested in that conversation. Actually, I need to be alone right now. Each tiny truth is a step toward reclaiming yourself. Each tiny boundary is a step toward integrity. Fourth, let go of the need to be understood. This is crucial. When you start living authentically, people won't get it. They'll be confused, concerned, maybe even angry, because you're no longer playing the role they assigned you. You're no longer fitting into the box they created for you. And that's uncomfortable for them. But their discomfort is not your responsibility. Your responsibility is to live your own life, not to make everyone else comfortable with your choices. Fifth, accept the disorientation. You're going to feel lost. You're going to doubt yourself. You're going to wonder if you're making a huge mistake. That's normal. That's part of the process. You're learning to navigate without a map, to live without a script, to be yourself without knowing exactly who that is yet. The disorientation isn't a sign you're doing it wrong. It's a sign you're actually doing it. And here's the paradox that makes this all possible. You don't have to know who you are to start being yourself. You don't have to have it all figured out. You just have to stop pretending. You just have to stop performing. You just have to start living from the inside out, even when you don't know what the inside is telling you yet. Because here's what Heidegger understood that most people miss: authenticity isn't a destination. It's not a state you achieve and then maintain forever. It's a practice, a way of being, a constant choosing of yourself over the comfort of conformity. Some days you'll nail it. Some days you'll fall back into old patterns. That's fine. The point isn't perfection. The point is awareness. The point is trying. Now, let me tell you what happens when you actually start doing this. At first, it gets worse. The exhaustion might intensify because you're no longer running on autopilot. You're actually feeling everything you've been numbing yourself to for years. The grief of wasted time. The anger at yourself for betraying who you are. The fear of what comes next. The loneliness of no longer fitting in. It's uncomfortable. It's disorienting. It's hard. But then something starts to shift. You notice you have energy for things that matter to you. Real energy, not forced energy. You notice conversations feel different when you're actually present instead of performing. You notice decisions become clearer when you stop asking what you should do and start asking what you actually want. You notice that being alone feels different, less like loneliness and more like coming home to yourself. And the exhaustion, it doesn't disappear completely. Life is still hard. Existence is still challenging. But the exhaustion stops being existential. It stops being that soul-crushing, bone-deep fatigue that no amount of rest can cure. Because you're no longer spending every ounce of energy maintaining a performance. You're no longer betraying yourself with every decision. You're no longer living someone else's life. You're living your own. Finally, for the first time, and yes, it's messy and uncertain and sometimes lonely, but it's real. And real is what your soul has been craving all along. This exhaustion you feel, this relentless tiredness that brought you here, is not your enemy, it's your ally. It's your authentic self refusing to give you energy for a life that isn't yours. It's your being staging a rebellion against inauthenticity. It's your soul saying, no more. I will not cooperate with this charade any longer, and you can fight it. You can push through it. You can try to overcome it with willpower and discipline and productivity hacks. Or you can listen to it. You can honor it. You can let it guide you toward the life you were always meant to live. Heidegger believed that most people never wake up. They spend their entire lives in a kind of waking sleep, going through the motions, playing their assigned roles, never once questioning whether this is actually their life or just a life they inherited. They're comfortable, safe, acceptable, and completely disconnected from themselves. They die without ever having lived. But some people wake up, usually not because they want to, but because they have to. Because the exhaustion becomes unbearable. Because the inauthenticity becomes suffocating. Because something in them finally says, this is not my life. You're waking up. That's what's happening. The exhaustion isn't a problem to be fixed. It's an awakening to be honored. It's your being calling you home to yourself. And yes, it's uncomfortable. Yes, it's disorienting. Yes, it's hard. But it's also the most important thing that will ever happen to you. Because here's the truth that nobody tells you. You can live a successful life and still be exhausted. You can achieve everything society tells you to achieve and still feel empty. You can do everything right and still be miserable. Because none of it matters if it's not actually yours. None of it matters if you're just performing. None of it matters if you've abandoned yourself to fit in. The exhaustion is your soul's way of telling you, come back, stop performing, stop pretending, stop living for them, come back to yourself, while there's still time. And there is still time. Right now, in this moment, you have a choice. You can go back to the performance, back to the script, back to the exhaustion of pretending, or you can take the first step toward something real, not perfect, not certain, not comfortable, but real. You can start asking the question you've been avoiding. Who would I be if I stopped trying to be who I'm supposed to be? You can start listening to the voice you've been silencing, your own. You can start honoring the knowing you've been denying, that this life, this performance, this role was never yours. And when you do that, when you finally stop betraying yourself, when you finally start living from the inside out instead of the outside, the exhaustion begins to lift, not because your life gets easier, but because you're finally living your own life instead of someone else's. This is what Heidegger meant by authentic existence. Not living according to some ideal or standard or expectation, but living in a way that's genuinely yours, chosen by you, owned by you, created by you. Taking full responsibility for your existence instead of outsourcing it to what people do. It's terrifying, it's liberating. It's the hardest thing you'll ever do, and it's the only thing worth doing. The exhaustion you feel is not a curse, it's a calling.